Welcome, everyone, to Unsafe Space. You're watching Dangerous Thoughts with me, Carter Laren. This is a series we do mostly every Wednesday evening, in which we're kind of trying to be dedicated to the application of reason, individualist ethics. These are products of the Enlightenment. Sometimes it seems like we're headed for another Dark Ages, as various flavors of collectivism vie for power here in the West. We've got kind of a collectivist necrosis eating away at the individualist foundations of Western civilization, but it's not fueled by reason. It's fueled by emotions, by hype, by manipulation, propaganda, sometimes vitriol. And it's not even motivated by genuine concern for humans as such, but usually motivated by psychological dysfunction, projection, often masked in performative concern for the public. But pretty much eager to sacrifice any individual members of the public as much as required, which, when the motivation is psychological, is everyone. Anyway, we don't have to be headed for the Dark Ages for a dystopian future, because we know the antidote to collectivism. We know the antidote to sophistry and histrionics. And on this series, Dangerous Thoughts, we're focused on relearning how to apply reason and individualism to our lives so we can make actual progress as a culture. Progress towards a world in which individual rights are respected and our interactions with each other are voluntary and healthy, as opposed to the fake progress that the progressives want to make, which is basically just a slow march to administrative tyranny. But they gussy it up in feel-good emotionalism, so they can dupe the naive people. But that's our focus here on Dangerous Thoughts, application of reason and individualist ethics. We're trying to foster a resurgence of, think of it as like the greatest hits of the Enlightenment ideas. We look at all of them, ones that matter the most. We try and encourage them, bring them about, teach people about them, and apply them to our lives. Welcome. If you're new, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, blah, 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 all that stuff. I don't feel like I'm not in the marketing mood. Welcome people in chat. Today's agenda is a little bit different. Periodically, I like to do a show focused or at least that includes Q&A from the community. It doesn't have to be necessarily focused on that, although it's nice if I can rely on, questions, and we can do a whole show that way. The last time we did a show like that was in May. So it's time. It's time to do another one. That's what we're doing today. If you want to call in with a question or comment, you can follow the link that I posted a link in chat. I think there's a link also if you're on our Discord server, you'll see it there. You don't have to have a question. You can have a counter argument or a comment or something. And if you can't or don't want to be on camera, you can post your stuff in chat. I'll try to get to it, but obviously I'm going to prioritize anyone who actually calls in. Ni hao, Greg the Baritone, in chat. So yeah, got a couple topics to discuss while we're waiting. So to kick it off, people come in late, and I didn't want to just get to this point in the show and then sit here and twiddle my thumbs until someone wanted to talk. So we got a couple other topics. Very important one. Since this show is called Dangerous Thoughts, I thought maybe we would begin by discussing dangerous thoughts. That's right. That is Beyonce that you see on the screen. Beyonce, from what I can tell, based on the spelling of her name, apparently is a French musician. I don't know. Anyhow, Beyonce was in the news recently. Let's see if you can pull up. I'll pull up the news. It's so sad. I don't actually listen to Beyonce, so here's the headline from an NPR article. NPR is always good for some laughs. Beyonce will change a lyric in her latest album after accusations of ableism. Ableism, bae. She's going to change her lyric. I don't want to read this whole thing, but she used the word spaz. She used the word spaz. Apparently that is bad. In fact, Hannah Devini is the here. Let's share that article. I should probably make it so I can just switch tabs more easily. That'll be easier. Here we go. Hannah Divini is the catalyst for this change. She wrote this article. When Beyonce dropped the same ableist slur as Lizzo on her new album, my heart sank. Because we care about Hannah's heart. And apparently it is sinking, like the Titanic. Because a pop star who uses the word nigga in her songs also used the word spaz. Yes. That's where we are culturally. In case you're wondering, just so you know, let's look at, here's her use of the word. Here's her lyrics. I mean, they are, I think really, Homer would be jealous. It is poetry. Got a lot of bands, got a lot of Hermes on me, got a lot of bands, got a lot of Ivy on me. Anyway, she goes on with some solipsism, and then she gets to, where is it here? Oh, some yummy. Make that bummy heated. Good stuff. Spazzing on that ass. Spaz on that ass, she says. Personally, I was offended when I saw that. It's a good thing we have Hannah protecting us from the word spaz. But in all seriousness, I did want to actually talk about this a little bit. My emotional reaction to this is a mixture of kind of disgust and approval or disapproval. Freudian. No, disgust and disapproval at the request to change the lyric. I mean, I think I kind of had an eye roll and I was like, you got to be kidding me. She's pissed off about the word spaz. But on this show, if you'll notice at the beginning, I didn't say this is dedicated to Carter's emotional barfing. Our emotions aren't arguments, even mine. So I can't say it's stupid because I feel like it's stupid. I mean, I can, but I can't expect anyone else to be convinced. That's not an argument. So I thought about this a bit, and I was trying to think, well, okay, is my emotional response actually rational here? Is this even a moral question? Because it could be amoral. It could be like there's just no right or wrong answer. It's tough here because we're talking about derogatory speech. Theoretically, although the way she uses it isn't derogatory, but spaz apparently is used often as derogatorily, which is it's a way of being mean, at least a little, even if in jest, and sometimes being mean is justified, but it makes it harder to talk about. Now, obviously, also we wouldn't want to legally limit speech, so that's not the question. The question, this is a cultural question. This is, it's not anti-individualist per se to have accepted some sort of cultural norms, right? And of course, there are going to be people in a culture that push the boundaries and break them, and there are going to be times when boundaries are more restrictive, and that's a conversation we should have. But basically, what we're talking about here is what's polite, and obviously, what's polite can vary from culture to culture, and it isn't always traceable to ethics, right? In some cultures, finishing the food on your plate is rude. In some cultures, not finishing the food on your plate is rude. So, sometimes it's arbitrary, and it does change over time. So it might actually be difficult to make an argument that culture should be one particular way or another. So the best I could come up with here was to examine my own emotional response on this, explain to you why it bothers me, and you guys can react and tell me I'm wrong. It shouldn't bother me. It's my own, I don't know, emotional road blockage, or you think there's something to this. So the reason that it bothers me, the reason that it's like an eye roll and I think it's ridiculous and I don't support Beyonce changing her lyric, or Lizzo, who apparently, I guess there's a person named Lizzo who's also a singer who apparently also changed a lyric at the behest of this same activist a couple weeks ago. But I think this, there's been an attempt in our culture recently, I mean by the last several years, to undermine standards for behavior. And I'm going to use a different example than spaz. I'm going to use the word retarded as an example because that's one that people always, like, that's kind of, a lot of people have decided they can't say that. I still say it derogatorily. And a lot of people think that they can't. So I want to talk about that. People in the 80s when I was growing up, we would have all agreed that using the word retarded derogatorily, if you're referencing someone who is actually mentally retarded, would be like not just impolite, but like really bad, right? And the reason for that would be that they can't help it. You can't, if you're born, if you have Down syndrome or whatever, and mental retardation was viewed. Some of us still view it this way. Mental retardation was viewed as a deficiency. There was a standard for what we kind of expect out of people in society generally, and it was better to not be mentally retarded. The norm was to not be mentally retarded. And of course, actual mentally retarded people don't meet that standard. But in polite society, we recognize that that's not through a fault of their own. So to ridicule them for that plight is considered, horribly rude and mean. And in fact, sympathy is usually in order, not ridicule, because it's recognized that they're at a disadvantage through no fault of their own, and it is a disadvantage. And so, you don't ridicule someone for being actually mentally retarded. But using the word retarded to ridicule someone who isn't actually mentally retarded was kind of common in the 80s, at least when I was growing up where I was in New York. It was considered rude, but like appropriately rude, right? It wasn't considered so mean as to be malevolent, right? It wasn't like, oh my God, right? You can't say that. Like, that wasn't a thing. And why was it okay to be mean in that way or to be rude in that way? Well, calling someone retarded was an exaggerated way to highlight an egregious intellectual error they had made, usually, right? Or maybe a series of errors that they made often. So you're highlighting a failure of theirs to meet an intellectual standard when they presumably actually have the capacity to meet the standard of kind of normal intelligence. So in other words, it was their fault. They were being sloppy or just, lazy or whatever, and they were failing to meet a basic standard that they ought to be able to meet. So it was a mocking way to, that's retarded, or you're being retarded, or whatever. Was it rude? Yeah, but fundamentally it was about holding people to a standard. So people who could be expected to meet that standard were held to that standard, and kind of mocked if they didn't, or if someone made a really bad argument, you might say that, right? So I think for the word spaz, the same thing is basically true. There's a standard of self-control, right? Some people literally can't control themselves, right? And they deserve sympathy for that, I think. But it's a standard nonetheless. Calling someone a spaz is mocking in the same way as calling someone, a retard was and is still for those who use it. It's an exaggerated way to point out failure to meet a cultural norm standard, which is a reasonable standard. If you're being kind of crazy, people would say, oh, you're a spaz because you're moving around and making spasmodic gestures and whatever. You're kind of unpredictable and it seems like you're out of control. Well, that's not behavior that we normally sanction. Of course, there are people who have a physical reason that they can't be in physical control. And we're not generally mean to them and say you're a spaz. So we, in the same way that mentally retarded people who, you feel sympathy for them. So calling someone a spaz is just an exaggerated way to point out a failure. So my reason for the negative reaction here is, like I said, there's this trend to normalize psychological dysfunction in general. And I think normalizing it is bad, because normalizing dysfunction undermines standards for behavior. I mean, look at people in their Twitter bios are bragging about, I have, borderline personality disorder. I have anorexia. I have, they make stuff up. Look, I've got DID or whatever, right? Multiple personality disorder. I forget what DID stands for. It's near ubiquitous at this point. And I think behavioral standards are important, especially reason as a standard of communication, as opposed to emotional, reactionary emotional crap, which is when you normalize psychological dysfunction, you're removing reason as the standard. You're saying, well, for this person, it's not the standard. You can't hold them to that standard because they have blah, 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 whatever it is, right? And it's also removing personal responsibility, right? And you can't have political freedom without personal responsibility. Those two go together. So this erosion of standards, I think, is an invitation to be managed like livestock. Progressives are eager to build a farm for all of us, And erosion of standards of behavior culturally is an invitation to just treat us like animals because we can't seem to have standards for ourselves. Now, Hannah's argument. Oh, thank you. Dissociative identity disorder. That's what DID is. Hannah's argument here. I'll just read her argument for that she gave to Lizzo. Hey, Lizzo, my disability, cerebral palsy, is literally classified as spastic diplegia, where spasticity refers to unending painful tightness in my legs. Your new song makes me pretty angry plus sad. Spaz doesn't mean freaked out or crazy. It's an ableist slur. It's it's 2022. Do better. So that was her argument that got Lizzo to change her lyric, and apparently that's the same argument that's getting Beyonce. Now let's just look this up. Spastic diplegia. Well, the word spastic, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, several definitions. First one, 1A, it's a pathological definition of the nature of a spasm or sudden contraction, characterized or affected by spasmodic symptoms or movement. Spasmodic, by the way, means occurring or done in brief, irregular bursts, caused by, subject to, or in the nature of a spasm or spasms. The second definition of spastic is performing involuntary contractile movements. The third, 3A, is affected with spastic paralysis. And you get down to 3B, you start getting into some derogatory uses. In weakened use, uncoordinated, incompetent, foolish, stupid, slang, offensive. Okay. Now, by the way, I'm sorry that this woman has cerebral palsy. That's horrible. I wish she didn't. I wish no one had cerebral palsy. But Beyonce, first of all, Beyonce wasn't even using it derogatorily, right? She's using it correctly as it feels, I assume, as a physical description, spazzing on that ass, spaz on that ass. I'm not 100% sure what she means by that, and I really don't want to think too deeply about the nature of her lyrics, but, it seems like it is in the vein of the occurring or done in brief irregular bursts kind of definition. Okay. So couch fainting over this lyric, which is what Hannah's doing a little bit more performance than couch fainting, but it's a performative injury, not an actual injury. She's not being hurt by this. She can say she feels sad or whatever, but taking her seriously promotes hypersensitive victim culture, which is the opposite of individual responsibility and self-reliance. I think she's being narcissistic and attention-seeking. I think this is a power play. Beyonce wasn't talking to her. Beyonce wasn't talking about people with cerebral palsy. She wasn't talking about anyone. She wasn't referencing your condition in any way. She wasn't even using it derogatorily, by the way. This has nothing to do with helping people with cerebral palsy. This person just wants power over other people's speeches. And I know that we're not supposed to pick on someone like Hannah Deviney because we're supposed to feel bad for her, which I do feel bad that she has cerebral palsy, but that doesn't, I'm not going to let her use that as an excuse to not have her ideas criticized. She's being a little Napoleon about this. She wants to have power over other people's speeches, and she's doing a performative I'm injured thing because it gets her attention. It doesn't actually help anyone with cerebral palsy, and I don't think it makes society better. I think it makes it worse that we are having to kowtow to the most hypersensitive person who happens to tweet about our lyrics. Now, that's probably the last time I will ever defend Beyonce, although who the hell knows? It's a crazy year, so maybe. Beverly says Carter's right. We should just be meaner to people generally. Yeah, that's exactly what I said, Beverly. Good job. All right. I think we still have no one who wants to argue with me. That means, by the way, if you don't come in and argue or question, I'm just going to assume that you completely 100% agree with everything I've said. So thank you. All right. Let's do another fun one before we get into. I do want to talk about the Harvard case in a moment because I think it's going to be important. But Beverly's significant other sent me this, and well, we can call him her insignificant other, really, because we do like to pick on him. But he sent this over, and I like the business plan. This is a good new business plan. If anyone is low on cash and really looking for a way to make some money, this is what I recommend now. Man claims to have sold dozens of ghost guns at Houston gun buyback event. So what he did, we don't have to read the whole thing, but what he did, he claims that he 3D printed firearms. Houston had a gun buyback event. He 3D printed firearms, and he exchanged them for the buyback. And of course, it cost him much less to print each gun. Let's see what he says. Each gun cost him about $3 to make. On Saturday, he says he exchanged 62 3D printed guns with Houston leaders and was given $50 per firearm. So those are great margins. I completely, this is a scam. It's a grift, but it's a grift and a scam against stupid governments. So, hey, I'm all for that. It's like the lottery. It's a tax on people who are bad at math. So this is a tax on leftists. Unfortunately, they're using our tax dollars to do it, but maybe they'll get the idea that this doesn't work eventually. I think Houston has said they're not going to do this anymore, but good for this guy. 3D print your way to success. Dawn says, is it even possible to think deeply on the nature of her lyrics? I don't know, but I mean, do you really want to know what she meant by those lyrics, Dawn? I don't know. I don't. All right. Let's talk about Harvard. So there is a lawsuit that has now reached the Supreme Court. And I'm going to pull it up. This is page 28. Let me just pull it up for you guys to see, because, visuals are so exciting. All right. So hopefully you can see that. This is Students for Fair Admissions Incorporated, which is the petitioner versus the president and fellows of Harvard College. So that's the lawsuit that you'll hear being talked about. This had been bundled together with a similar case involving the University of North Carolina. But after Ketanji Brown Jackson joined the Supreme Court, they had to split the cases because she is on the board of overseers at Harvard. So there's a conflict of interest here, or she needed to recuse herself. I don't think she's legally required to recuse herself, but it's expected, and I think it would raise a lot of eyebrows if she didn't. So she recused herself. So now this case is by itself, and this is a case about admissions discrimination by Harvard against Asians. And this is important because it might overturn an earlier case from 2003, Grutter versus Bollinger. And that case upheld affirmative action. So a lot of colleges have affirmative action admissions policies. That one was University of Michigan Law School. And the decision in 2003, the Grutter decision, I'm saying Grutter, but it might be Grutter. But it looks like it should be Grutter if I follow the rules of pronunciation, but Grutter bothers me as a word, so I'm going to say Grutter unless someone corrects me. Anyway, that decision permitted the use of racial preferences in student admissions to promote diversity. To promote diversity, which we'll get to. But that was that case. And I expect the Supreme Court with this one, this Harvard case, I mean, I don't know. I'm not an expert on our Supreme Court, obviously. But I think they might overturn the 2003 case that permitted affirmative action. And And that is what's being asked of them. These petitioners are asking. This question's presented. Number one, should this court overrule Grutter versus Bollinger and hold that institutions of higher education cannot use race as a factor in admissions? Right. So this is a big question. And it obviously all relates back to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Zero Fucks in chat says, Harvard? Never heard of it. Yeah. Apparently, it's a very expensive school on the East Coast. I don't know. They turn out lizard people who get jobs in world governments. Anyway, look, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we've talked about this before. I've talked about some issues I have with it previously. There's a lot of collectivist classifications of people, which does open up when you start collectivizing people, when you start, viewing them as members of different classes or races or whatever you want to do rather than individuals. You open yourself up to equity arguments, right? Because then you open yourself up to people making arguments like, well, there's a disparity of outcome, therefore that's evidence of wrongdoing, blah, blah, blah. I've talked previously about, excuse me, how even Kimberly Crenshaw's kind of most famous papers about intersectionality, introducing intersectionality, I think 1989, there was mapping the margins and I don't know, I forget the titles of the two papers. It's been a while. But in these papers, I've said this before, that she makes in the context of the Civil Rights Act, she's making a valid argument in the sense that when you group these people, when you group people up into different classes of people, different categories, it will cause problems at the intersections of those categories. It'll cause other problems as well, but the intersectional problems that arise that she uses, that she cites a few legal cases. Those are that's legitimate if you're looking at groups of people in that way. That does arise, and of course that will always arise, and you'll have endless groupings, and it's not solvable unless you treat people like individuals. Of course, that's not her conclusion. Her conclusion is let's go crazier with intersectionality. But it opens, the Civil Rights Act and stuff like that opens this up. It opens up the arguments here. And Title VI is the part that's in question here that is related to this Harvard case. So I'm just going to pull up Title VI so we can take a look at it, because I think it's important to see what the language is, and we're going to see where I think there was maybe some errors made in writing this. So, civil rights requirements, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So this is just this one paragraph I'm going to read, and this is the meat. Title VI prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin in any program or activity that receives federal funds or other federal financial assistance. Programs that receive federal funds cannot distinguish among individuals on the basis of race, color, or national origin, either directly or indirectly, in the types, quantity, quality, or timeliness of program services, aids, or benefits that they provide, or the manner in which they provide them. This prohibition applies to the intentional discrimination as well as to procedures, criteria, or methods of administration that appear neutral but have a discriminatory effect on individuals. By the way, you can see right there's some wedge for equity and outcomes-based evaluations. Then discriminatory effect on individuals because of their race, color, or national origin. Policies and practices that have such an effect must be eliminated unless a recipient can show that they were necessary to achieve a legitimate non-discriminatory objective. Even if there is such a reason, the practice cannot continue if there are alternatives that would achieve the same objectives, but that would exclude fewer minorities. Persons with limited English proficiency must be afforded a meaningful opportunity to participate in the programs, blah, blah, blah. The rest of it doesn't matter for this particular case. So you probably notice some errors here philosophically right away. But let's talk about this act. First of all, I think the most important thing to notice here is federal funds are the hook, right? Federal funds are the hook. They tax you or print money or borrow money. Therefore, which is another, printing money is another form of tax. Borrowing money is taxing your kids. So they using force steal money from you, so in some way, indirectly, and then they use that money to fund things. But then, of course, the funding doesn't come with no strings attached, which, you could argue if you wanted, you could say, well, maybe it shouldn't come with no strings. Otherwise, they'll be funding horrible things. I would say you're right. It shouldn't come with no strings. It shouldn't come at all. Actually, it's what I would argue. But so federal funds are the hook, right? And then most of this, the beginning of this, kind of sounds reasonable. Well, okay, if you're gonna have them, if you're gonna require something for them taking federal funds, well, it sounds reasonable to say don't discriminate based on race. But they couldn't even stick with that principle in this, right? Even that principle was too much for them to stick with. They had to have caveats, right? So let's look at a couple of them. First, they say, applies to intentional discrimination, but also stuff that appears to be neutral but has a discriminatory effect on individuals. Well, that invites outcomes-based analysis. And what if, I'm just going to throw this out here, what if there are differences between groups that actually might result in different output or outcomes? Would you therefore conclude that is that a discriminatory effect, right? If the basketball team has very few Chinese people, is that discriminatory? Because height is a requirement. I don't know, right? And then they go on. Then they can't even leave it at that. They can't even apply this principle, which again seems like a reasonable principle. I don't think it should be federally mandated because I don't think these funds should exist, but it is a good kind of moral principle to not discriminate, right? They can't even leave it at that. Policies and practices that have such an effect must be eliminated unless, it is okay to do that sometimes. Unless a recipient can show that they were necessary to achieve a legitimate non-discriminatory objective. I just want to ask the obvious question. What the hell does that mean? This is non-objective language. They had no idea how to define the exceptions. I mean, you read this and it's like, oh, they had no idea. They're like, well, there should be exceptions, but we have no idea how to define them. We're going to be too intellectually lazy to try and articulate what the exceptions are, or we're afraid to articulate them because we'll get shit from people. So we're going to throw out a word. Hey, how about we're going to rely on how people interpret the word legitimate? What's legitimate? To whom? By whose standards? Well, that's going to change depending on who's sitting on the bench. And it does. Right? So, in the Grutter versus Bollinger case, diversity was considered a legitimate non-discriminatory objective. I'm going to read you. This is part of the majority opinion. This is by Sandra Day O'Connor, who wrote the majority opinion. She said that the Constitution, quote, does not prohibit the law school's narrowly tailored use of race in admissions decisions to further a compelling interest in obtaining the educational benefits that flow from a diverse student body. She also went on to say that this shouldn't last forever, that in 25 years we won't need this kind of thing, but in the short term we need it. That was her argument. And that was the majority opinion. Now, as for this Harvard case, according to the petition that they've filed, I was actually fascinated by some of this. Harvard has a history of using kind of subjective criteria for excluding races, like character of people or fitness of people. And they did this to the Jews in the early 1920s, kind of openly. They kind of knew that if they said they were going to discriminate against Jews, people would get mad at them. So they developed this criteria. Another thing that comes out in this is Harvard immediately changed some of their admissions policies and admitted more Asians as soon as the lawsuit was filed, which doesn't show guilt, but is questionable. And if we go, I didn't read this part of the Civil Rights Act, but those exceptions for, hey, you can discriminate if you've got some legitimate reason. There's an exception to the exception, which is like, well, unless you can come up with race-neutral alternatives that give you the same outcome. And apparently Harvard hasn't even tried to do that. What they have done, they invite African Americans and Hispanic students with lower PSAT scores to apply, but when they're recruiting whites and Asians, they use higher scores as their standard. They have a racial makeup one-pager, which is like a report. I guess they're so obsessed with race that it's updated daily. So they have this one-pager, and they go back and they re-examine it to make sure they have the right percentages of every race that they want at Harvard. By the way, they put Asian Americans as one big race, which the petitioner here in this case doesn't like, but is using that language because that's what Harvard does. They have a LOP list. They have like here's all the people we want to admit, but that's too big for the number of beds and whatever they have. So they go back to their LOP list and they use race as a reason to lop people off, to like, oh, that person's out, they're the wrong race. And I think the most interesting thing, the most damning piece of evidence is just to look at this one chart. I mean, these are the admission rates by race and ethnicity and academic decile. So what that means is 10 means you're in the top 10% of the applicants. 1 means you're in the bottom 10% of the applicants. And let's just look at this. This is for Harvard. Let's just look at, for example, if you're Asian American and in the top 10%, you have a 12.7% chance of getting in. If you're African American and way down at 4, so like the lower 40%, you have a higher chance. You have a 12.8% chance of getting in. I mean, to me, looking at this, this is just massively damning. It's clear that they're playing games with race. And this is one of the exhibits in this petition. So, Harvard's actually they actually have an Office of Institutional Research, and there was an article in 2012 that came out alleging that Harvard had an Asian quota, and so Harvard asked their own Office of Institutional Research to look into these claims. And according to their own office, their report found, quote, evidence that Asians are disadvantaged in the admissions process and that Harvard's personal rating was to blame. So basically, they're getting personal points like quality of character and other points for being African American or Hispanic, and you don't get those. And they get so many points that it's equivalent of like winning a national award or something. It's like almost impossible to get that many points if you're not African American or Hispanic. There's also these weird arguments in here. I mean, I'm kind of simplifying it because there's more depth in this case. There's a lot of complexity here, but there's weird arguments about like, well, it's okay to boost applicants, but not to penalize them, which I just think is the most brain dead commandment to take seriously. I mean, if there's a limited number of slots, you can't boost someone without penalizing someone else. That's how zero sum works, and college admissions are zero sum. So. Also, Harvard's thing isn't temporary. This case argues that they could fix their problem pretty easily if they could get the racial makeup they wanted. If they stopped giving preference to the children of alumni and donors who are mostly white and wealthy, but they don't want to do that. So they got to take it out on the Asians or whatever. Now, the ACLU filed an amicus brief in this case. And I'm just going to read part of their amicus brief so you can kind of know where the ACLU is coming from. Obviously, they do not, being the modern ACLU that they are, which is basically a progressive activist organization. They say, yet petitioners invite the court to hold that diversity is not a compelling interest. So they think diversity is a compelling interest. They're saying, hey, the petitioners invite the court to hold that diversity is not a compelling interest and that race-conscious admissions practices contradict the purpose of the 14th Amendment. They ask the court to overturn, as a, quote, egregiously wrong, its long-established precedents upholding narrowly tailored race-conscious admissions programs, reaffirmed most recently in Fisher 2, 2016. In their view, the Constitution and Title VI require schools to blind themselves to the reality that race often matters in contemporary society and require this court to reject the considered academic judgment of Harvard University, University of North Carolina, and virtually every institution of higher learning in the world, even if it would lead, as it surely would, to a more racially divided educational experience for countless young people. So ACLU wants the court to leave it the way it is. You can go ahead and discriminate based on race as much as you want if your purpose is a racial diversity on campus, basically. And their argument is, I mean, first of all, in case you haven't been paying attention to the ACLU, civil liberties for them have now become collective things. I don't know if they ever were individual liberties, but they're viewed collectively. So the ACLU is now this, like, they view everything as this war between groups. That's this collectivist goal to balance group interests. That's, and historically, that's almost never civil, and it certainly has nothing to do with liberties. So that's the ACLU for you. But the problem you have with federal involvement with stuff like this, the problem you have with giving money and then having strings attached, is actually, I think this is a complex question that you could ask, because ACLU is arguing that diversity is important for college, right? That you need to. If you got to play games with race, you got to play games with race. You need that racial diversity on campus. Well, is it important? I'm sure if you want to conclude that ethnic diversity is important to education, you could conclude that. I'm sure you could come up with stuff to support it. If you want to conclude that homogeneity is important, you could probably do that. Right? I mean, it was actually a Harvard professor, Robert Putnam, who begrudgingly concluded that less homogeneous neighborhoods had a lower trust factor even amongst people of the same ethnicity, and that actually mixing ethnicities in neighborhoods actually led to more distrust among people of the same ethnicity, not just between ethnicities. So, I mean, you could make arguments that homogeneity is actually important and not diversity. So aside from the moral problem, the federal government involvement, there's a practical problem, I think, when it comes to complex issues like, let's say you want to heal from a racially fractured society, or you want to like have the best educational experience possible. There's a question of pedagogy, right? Like, how do you engineer an educational experience to optimize the outcome? Well, that begs some questions, like, what's the outcome that you want? Do you want people to believe a certain thing? Do you want them to vote a certain way? Do you want them to be optimally productive? Do you want them to be happy? It really begs the question, like, what is education? What does it mean? What does it mean to get an education? And do we want the federal government deciding what that means? What does it mean to get an education? I think actually it's a very complex question. I've debated people about what it means to get an education. And I think almost everyone has a slightly different definition of what they care about in terms of education. It's a complex issue. It should be left just practical reasons. It should be left to the free market. Education is no different than any other product or service. If you think cars or entertainment or food or housing should be left to the free market, so should education. And if you leave it to the free market, you'd get some institutions will opt for more ethnic diversity. And at least if they're institutions like Harvard, at least they can be honest about it and be like, yeah, this is what we're doing. Okay, fine. Some will opt for more ideological diversity, which I happen to think is probably more valuable than ethnic diversity. They can be honest about that. Some won't focus on that at all, but they're going to opt for like just high IQ, high performance. They can be honest about that. And you can go to the university that meets the criteria for what you want. And I think this is another example of the failure of central control and central planning. It enshrines some belief system about the nature and purpose of education, right? And what trade-offs you should make and blah, blah, blah. It's this one-size-fits-all thing. Change is very difficult. And it invites kind of surreptitious behavior from the universities. And you end up with these situations where, you know, some court's going to have to interpret what's legitimate for an educational purpose. I don't think everyone agrees on that. By the way, your tax dollars, Harvard's only in this lawsuit because they accept your tax dollars. Your tax dollars are subsidizing Harvard's experiment here. And just as a reminder, they have a $53 billion endowment. So maybe they could just stop taking tax dollars and discriminate all they want and be honest about it. All right. I think Cheeky Mare's here. Is that correct?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Hey, Cheeky, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm all right. Thanks for coming on. What do you want to chat about?
So similar topic. My company has been growing quite rapidly in the last 2 years. And we have just reached the 150 threshold where now we have to start documenting our diversity statistics. You know, how many people of color do you have on your board? How many women? Blah, blah, blah. And I've been tapped on the shoulder to be part of the HR committee, blah, 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 to try and figure out how we can cultivate a more diverse environment because we are mostly white. We have lots of women in the field, so that's okay. And we've got 2 women on our board, but we've hired probably a dozen or so African-American specifically, and 10 of them have left for better, more lucrative jobs, and the other 2 did not meet our criteria on work productivity. So they were dismissed. So is this, and we do a lot of work with, we don't do it with the government, the federal government, but we work for municipalities who get federal funding. Do you think this ruling will affect that?
Sorry, ask that last question again.
Well, do you think this ruling, if it goes towards you're not allowed to discriminate based on race, do you think that will affect it?
Oh, that's a good question. I assume that if the municipalities that you're working with accept federal funds, and if we assume that, I don't know about the municipalities that you're talking about, and I don't really know how many municipalities operate, but let's assume that they're accepting the federal funds, and let's assume that they are like many progressive municipalities. They have racial quotas. Basically, they've got some reason to be hiring, quotas, right? They've got
you have to have a certain number of minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses bid for the contracts that we are working with.
So that I could see this affecting that. I don't think it would affect your company's requirements because your company doesn't accept federal funds, and the rule that you're talking about, I don't believe is related to this directly. It's related to this ideology, but I don't think it's related to this directly. I actually don't know. Yeah, this is a really good question because I don't know what the actual, maybe it is a civil rights. I think it is the Civil Rights Act of 1964, but it's not Title VI. I think it's a different part of the act. That's the employer discrimination stuff. And I think businesses like yours have 2 routes they can go. They can meticulously document their hiring process and demonstrate that it's as fair and quote colorblind as possible, and then deal with the repercussions of having to justify that, because you probably will if you don't end up with the right mix. Or you view it as a tax, and it basically means you have to spend extra time and resources and money trying to recruit the demographics that aren't interested in your business for whatever reason or another, right?
Okay.
So unfortunately, I don't think your company's this isn't gonna help your company directly. It might change how your clients have to operate, but I don't think it's gonna affect your company.
So because I think I found the only HR guy in the entire world that is libertarian leaning. He wants
Ron Swanson?
Yeah, it's Ron Swanson, exactly. He wants heterodox thinking on this committee, and so I've been preparing. I'm probably going to be the only right-leaning or libertarian-leaning person on this board. So I'm trying to get ahead of the game and think of. So we were in this webinar for how to make your workplace more diverse, blah blah blah, and they said something like, you need a certain percentage. So I looked it up, and in my field, it's like in the whole country, it's like 75% white men, 12% Latino, and lower and lower percentages therefore. So I did a quick calculation, and my particular department is fairly close to the average for the whole United States. So if none of the requirements, people who fit these requirements are interested in a role in our company, and the ones that have decided to move on to a different company, what do we do? Go find some random person off the street and pay him $60,000 a year to just sit there? I don't know how to.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two threats, and I think one's probably more likely than the other. One threat is that you end up getting sued. Someone doesn't like the makeup of your company, and you have to defend yourself if you don't have numbers that they like or whatever. But so I would make sure that you're doing enough to nip that in the bud, right? Make sure that can't be successful. And that is both having to go spend extra time and energy recruiting demographics that you need, and also justifying your process, like having a process that demonstrates as much as possible. So I think for an argument in this arena here, you can still make a process argument, right? They're not just going to look at the outcome and say, well, you don't have enough of this demographic, therefore you must be discriminating. You can actually counter. My understanding is businesses can still counter with saying, no. Here are the steps we've taken to get more of that demographic. Here's our hiring process, and here's our process to check our hiring process to try and make sure it's non-discriminatory as much as possible. And this is just where the cards fell. Like, this is the way the cards fell. Like, this is what we got. And I think you can defend that. I think the real threat is the people that are sitting on this committee are going to want to do. It's like if I had a company that had 150 people and we had to do this, right? The purpose of the committee, my direction to the committee, that the culture I would try and create in the committee would be, we need to meet the requirements in order to protect ourselves from crazy people who are going to sue us or the government, right? But that's it. This is a tax on our business. We're trying to build a business. We're trying to be profitable. We're trying to hire the best people, regardless of any of that crap. We don't really care. But this committee's job is to make sure we don't get in trouble, and that's it. My guess is that the committee you're on will be populated largely with people who believe in the cause and want to make this a crusade to not just meet minimum requirements and make sure the company doesn't get in trouble and can go on, but actually want. This is a vector that social justice warriors use to usurp companies, right? So that they will turn this into an activist thing, and no number will be good enough. Nothing you're doing will be good enough. There's literally no argument that will stop them. No, they will never say, yes, it's good enough. They will want to constantly, not just increase the hires and the demographics, but vilify the company. They're going to constantly want to see problems, right? That's going to be their entire mindset. And so that's what you're combating. I hope your boss knows that, the guy who you're talking about, like, who's tapped you to do this. I don't know if he's your boss or whatever, but I hope he understands that. And if he doesn't, maybe I would sit down and have a conversation with him about it. If he's kind of libertarian leaning.
No,
and say, look,
he definitely doesn't want us to become, I think James Lindsay says, the paper clip factory. He doesn't want us to become a activist and then the process that we do. He wants us to do the process that we are, and then, maybe address some of these shortcomings if they are shortcomings. So he knows, and that's the reason, because I told him that I was going to Pork Fest, and he's like, oh really, great, awesome. And so it was a relief, kind of, that my HR guy wasn't crazy. But anyway, beside the point, I think
that's good that he's not crazy. And I would say then you need to strategize with him about how to police the committee, and just you can't have a single crazy SJW on the committee. Like, you can have people who want to meet the rules, but the company's got to come first. The best interest of the company has to come first, and that's the danger.
Okay.
Right. And there's no, like, I wish I could give you a silver bullet. I don't think there's a silver bullet for this is how you stop it. I mean, it's like, if you don't want to succumb to the zombie apocalypse, don't put a zombie on your team, like, because they're going to bite someone eventually, and, like, it's contagious. So, that's the best analogy I can say. But, like, if you're doing the right things, if you're collecting data and can shut someone down like that and convince the rest of the team that, like, no, this is, we're meeting these requirements, we're doing these things, and kind of move on, and don't let it become a separate job within the company, like don't let it become its own entity. Right. So minimize the meetings, just minimize everything, minimize the importance of it, minimize the meetings, minimize the value in it, all that stuff.
Okay, this is the last thing, and then I'll let you get to someone else. So the strategy I was going for is doing, like you said, gather data, figure out where we're lacking, and then say, okay, we're competing with firms that have thousands of employees who have to meet the same requirements. And if 2% of the population of my specific industry, 2% are Black men or Black women, then the bigger firms are going to be competing. So do we give and I'm going to use their buzzword, are we going to use a pay gap, and we have to pay twice to kind of steal these people away from the bigger companies?
You could. I think you run the risk of poisoning your entire like, people will hate you. They'll find out. People will always find out. And your other employees will hate you. And I think what these committees are doing, what these rules are doing, is they're inviting you to commit suicide so that they don't have to kill you. And that's one way you can commit suicide, is doing that, I think. I think if you make offers that are commensurate with other people from, let's say it's you're looking for Black men, and you've got 75%, or you've got some large percentage of white men or whatever. If you're making offers to them that are commensurate with the packages that the white people are taking, but the Blacks are just not wanting to work unless they, they're holding out for more money than the white population is, then let them walk. Let them hold out for more money. And that's what I would do and say, look, but document it all and be like, look, we offered to all these people. It's commensurate with all these other people. We can't help it. Right. I don't know what's happening in your industry exactly, but if you're saying that 10 of the 12 left for better offers, I would almost guarantee that there's a premium being paid to minorities in your industry if those minorities are underrepresented and people are worried about getting in trouble. Like, that's probably what's happening. Large companies are probably doing that because large companies are notoriously not transparent. They're happy to try and play games with that. And, and frankly, some leftist progressive cultures will be okay with it. I mean, you'll definitely find companies where the progressives will be like, yes, they should be getting paid more than me because slavery, right? Like, that's that will happen. I would need to know a lot more details to give real advice, and I'm not a lawyer, and this is
I gotcha.
But culturally, I would say don't sabotage your culture. Don't get your other employees to hate you. You need to have people you need the company generally to view you as fair, doing the right thing, being transparent about it, and not being and just preventing this kind of crusade behavior that's likely to happen.
Okay. Cool.
Right? So I don't know that was super helpful, Cheeky. I'm sorry. I wish you had like 2 + 2. I could say 4 and we could be done.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Brilliant.
I don't even know if that would work. Although luckily we're in a engineering firm, so 2 + 2 better equal 4.
Yeah, well, only in the engineering department.
Right.
So
yeah.
Outside the engineering department. By the way, one thing that you can do is there are, collectivists often, and even the 1964 Civil Rights Act, they group people in these very broad categories. Like Harvard, for example, even, and we were just talking about Asian Americans. I mean, there's Taiwanese and Chinese and Japanese and Philippine. There's like all different kinds of Asian Americans. And some groups, for whatever reason, are more into one particular thing than another. So you might want to find, like, maybe there's a bunch of, if you need black men or black women, maybe there's a bunch of immigrants from Nigeria who are like really into engineering. I have no idea, right? Like, maybe there's some subcultures that you can go after. Be like, okay, we're going to specifically target these particular sub demographics because the hit rate's higher. And maybe people from Botswana aren't into coding. I don't know. I have no idea. Or people from Detroit are, and people from Columbus aren't. I have no idea. But that's I would maybe consider targeting resources there. But view it as a tax. View the whole thing as a tax. Set up the mindset that this is a tax, that this is a hoop you have to jump through to satisfy progressive administrative tyrants in DC, because that's what it is.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you. Back to regularly scheduled programming.
Alrighty. Thanks, Cheeky. All right. Cheeky Mare, everyone. Yay. All right. I think actually we can be done soon. I mean, I'm happy to end after an hour. I only definitely wanted to talk about Harvard and Beyonce. So we talked about that. And if people don't have, I'm going to look through chat in a minute. If people have stuff that they definitely want to talk about, I'll try and find it. But otherwise, I don't feel the need to keep going if people don't want to do Q&A or they don't want to have combos. That's cool. Yeah, okay. I don't see a lot. So I'm happy. Oh, wait, would you be open to talking about IP laws? Yeah, I don't know that I would be helpful, but sure, I'll talk about IP laws. I think it's an interesting topic about which many libertarians disagree. I'm probably more pro IP than a lot of libertarians. So yeah, Coley, jump in and we'll talk about IP laws. In the meantime, we will read some Beyonce lyrics. Are you ready? Beverly loves when I read Beyonce. Cool it down, 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 my pretty. Bad, bad bitch. Make the bad, bad glitchy. Fine, 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 fine. Thank you for saving me, Lord Coley. I didn't want to read any more of those.
Sure. No, it's just that I recently had an interesting conversation with somebody who is very, very bought into the whole left progressive ideas, talks a lot about representation in media. And I came up with an interesting point where perhaps it's not so much an issue of representation, but an issue of IP. We have such strict copyright laws, right? That basically allow a original IP holder to murder, in a financial sense, anybody who tries to do anything close to reflecting their work, especially if the company is big and long-standing. If IP laws were changed to allow fan works, where it's not an issue of fraud, it's very clearly, I am not the original creator, this is just a work that is born of love of the original work. It is related, but not official. Then I don't think anybody would be anywhere near as mad about swapping out characters for different representations, different genders. I mean, you could theoretically change whole elements of the work and you'd still get your kicks and giggles without actually having to try and grab that original IP.
Do you think so? This is interesting. Your contention is that people are upset about replacing Doctor Who with a woman because of IP laws? Like, I guess I'm not following.
They're not thinking about the IP laws. What they're upset about is something that they loved, something that was created one way, and that's what drew them, is now suddenly being changed because somebody else is in charge. They're not thinking about the IP directly.
Because no one can make a derivative that they like because it's owned by someone. Okay.
And people would still be drawn to those alternative IPs, I believe, but you wouldn't be taking the original away.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So you and I could sit down and make a Marvel movie that people liked, and that will be fine.
Right.
Okay. I mean, I couldn't. Maybe I'm assuming you're a good writer. So, okay. So this is, I think IP law is interesting to me because, first of all, I do think all right, let me caveat everything. I think what I'm describing would arise in some way in a completely free market voluntary society. I'm not arguing that we need a government for this. Let's put that on the side.
Sure.
We do have a government though, so let's start there. I think there's a reason. I think there's a valid reason for IP. I think if you look at just philosophically, man's primary means of survival is his rational mind. What moves humanity forward is not muscle labor. It's not working hard. Those are all good things. Working hard is good.
Those are sustaining skills, but not necessarily ingenuity skills.
That's right. It's the mind. It's the products of the mind that move us forward. It's when people figure out, people figure out how to, stick two differently doped pieces of semiconductor together and make it into a, electrical switch. And from that, you get the entire computer industry. And that's the ingenuity. And I get that there's never just one person who does all the inventions built on other stuff, but it's the product of the human mind is valuable. And so just like if I grow corn, you can't steal my corn. If I come up with an idea, I think there's a legitimate function in society for having some boundaries around what other people can do with my idea, assuming that it's, something that we all like, I guess, even with a bad idea, right?
Right.
You'd want to do that. But there's also a trade-off, right? If you look at something like Disney, I remember I'm old enough to remember when they basically bribed all of Congress in order to get the copyright extended on Mickey Mouse and Disney shit. Remember that?
Yeah, part of what I'm thinking of exactly is now you've got your life and then some to exploit an IP, which, might I point out, most of Disney's IPs are from older works they did not originally create.
Yes. Right. They do a lot of cribbing stuff from Hans Christian Andersen and modifying it and whatever. Right. And interestingly, since we're talking on IP, because I was in the tech space for a while and I did a lot of IP, like I made, the success of our first business was licensing IP predominantly that we spent a long time developing and working on. So but I'll say something about tech. I think there's a lot screwed up with it. I think patents are granted way too easily. I think it's gotten out of control. It's a quagmire, and you've got basically, think about the DMV, but instead of like stamping stuff and taking your picture, they have to review complex technical documents and decide whether the prior art is like covers the thing you're doing or whether your invention is new. I mean, it's not going to go well, and it hasn't. It's a mess. So it is a mess, but tech stuff, I think it's 19 years and the IP expires. So, we had a window to exploit it, but we couldn't just sit on it for 50 years and then decide later we're going to try and exploit the IP. There was an incentive to do something with it. And there are patent trolls. I've also dealt with patent trolls. In another business that I'm still involved in, like we would have patent trolls come after us, and the patent trolls would work the legal system, and we would have some, they never made a thing in their lives. They filed some crap patents that usually there was prior art for, or we didn't actually infringe on, but they would come after us and they would say, well, we need $100,000 to go away. And, would sit down with our lawyer, and our lawyer would say, yeah, their patent is shit. You could absolutely win, and it would cost you more than $100,000. So just pay them. Right.
Sure.
And $100,000. I mean, this was a small business. $100,000 wasn't nothing to us. This isn't Microsoft. And you also see companies do this, like large tech companies collect huge patent portfolios and then have battles over their patent portfolios, and they're like, well, I have 500 patents and you have 650 patents, but and they leverage them against each other. So I think there's definitely a lot broken with the patent system, but I'm not against the idea of patents, and at least there's the tech patents. The copyright patents, I liked the idea of them being limited to a person's lifetime, right? Or you could say their life expectancy even, maybe, or something like, okay, there's like some period of time where they have to capitalize on it, but they've it's weird that they can be assigned to entities and then survive well after Walt Disney's dead, for example.
You can keep them alive even, so long as you produce something that is related to specific IP within a 20-year span. You revive the IP.
Right. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Right. And that's how you have companies like, and someone just wrote in chat, a G-Man wrote in chat, if you're Disney, your IP protection never expires. Yeah. And that's kind of the oligarchical nature of our system. And so I think that is definitely a problem. For stuff like Marvel, I mean, since that's what you're bringing up, I don't know if you brought up Marvel specifically, but that's the kind of stuff you're talking about, right?
Yeah, it is, and it's very hot right now, that Marvel thing. Yeah.
So I think partly we're trying to solve a problem that's not solvable with IP, and that problem is culture is committing seppuku, and we've got like just really, really bad psychology and philosophy running companies, and so they're going to ruin stuff. And I don't know that, like, okay, you could let other people do it. There's examples where you wouldn't want to let other people do it. What if someone was doing a good job with it? Do you want the lefties to be? You want You want Disney to be able to go start turning it into crap and mass marketing it and ruining the universe that you're creating as a small creator. So I don't know that throwing out. I know you're not saying throw out IP, but I don't know that this is necessarily solvable. I mean, we've talked about some problems with IP, so clearly that needs to be solved. But I mean, I don't know that it's necessarily solvable through IP. I mean, there's a reason to have derivative works covered and say, well, let's say I invent Superman. I write a bunch of Superman comics, and you come along and be like, well, I'm going to write a different Superman story. It's a derivative work, and it's like, well, no, but that is my character. Like maybe I invented, I spent a lot of time developing it and building the universe and getting people to like Superman, and so it's kind of cheating to use my character. Now, I don't think that should last forever. I shouldn't be Disney. Like, well, decades after I'm dead, there's some corporate entity continuing to use it, or to continue to claim ownership. So I see why derivative works would be covered. And I think it's a two-edged sword, right? You can say, well, we don't want Disney producing more Star Wars by themselves because Kathleen Kennedy's ruining it, and we want other people to produce Star Wars. But what if they weren't? What if there's a company that wasn't ruining it? Do we want Disney to be able to steal it and ruin it? Because they will.
Right.
So I think you gotta be careful a little bit with that. And I think the problem what's bothering you is culture, not the IP law. I mean, the IP laws have problems. I get it. But the big problem here is there's a bunch of people who want to rewrite this crap. And there's a bunch of people who want to use the Marvel universe to push propaganda that's leftist. There's a bunch of people who want to use it to tear down what they view as, I don't know, icons of Western culture that they think, all of Western culture should be destroyed because they're angry at their daddy or whatever it is. That's the problem. No amount of laws solves a necrotic, decrepit culture.
Honestly, I don't think that the IP laws would have to change that much. It would just have to open a bit of a door for alternative works.
So what would you suggest? What's your suggestion there?
Well, I mean, I haven't sat down and graphed it out or anything, but it seems an awful lot to me, it's not that hard to determine who the original source is, who the original spark is, so to speak. And if you are interested in that person's ideas on what they originally created, if you think that's the only source that really can bring the thing to life, then that's your fan base. Those are the people who actually follow the core creation. As long as you're not trying to represent yourself as the original creator, I do think that there is wiggle room in a more free market mindset. You have fan fiction as a whole subculture, huge subculture, not a lot of it super great. But that would be, I think, determined better by the free market. You write a poorly done fan fiction, it's not going to do very well. So you do actually have a little bit of precedent in the Star Wars universe. The Star Wars extended universe, which I believe was mostly novels, was not actually 100% officially condoned from what I understand, but accepted.
Okay.
I'm a little shaky on the history myself. I haven't read up on it in depth, but I do believe it was other people wrote books on the extended universe. And I do think Disney used some of that in their newest stuff, referencing it. But ultimately, it was not canon, if you know that term.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although, I mean, in Star Wars, Disney has destroyed canon, I think, already a little bit. But
Sure, but that's the problem, is they have the official license. They have the right to say it's canon. That's why there's a argument about death of the author.
Right. Right. I mean, I hate to cite the music industry as an example here, but I will. At least the music industry kind of figured out, I don't know that they've done it well, but it seems like they've done it better. They've figured out that there is they because they have a licensing structure set up for derivative work, right? So there's a difference between the mechanicals and like the so let's say like there's the person who writes the music, there's a person who performs the music. If you want, you can license for different things. I think a lot of this is just licensing organizations that have set up to do this. I don't think it's the government necessarily doing it, but there is collaboration with Copyright Office here, and so it's kind of set up so that we expect someone to do a cover, and who gets paid? Like, well, you played the horns in the original, but you didn't write the original, so you don't get paid for the cover, but the person who wrote the original does get something, right? And so it's kind of set up for that. And even there were some hiccups with electronic music and a lot of sampling. But even now, I think a lot of sampling is easier to license, and people sample stuff and get away with it, and it's cheaper. So maybe you could like redesign the IP model in other creative industries to recognize that, like, look, there is going to be derivative work. Something needs to get paid to the original person for this, but not everyone. So like, if you write a Star Wars thing, well, okay, someone does own the concept originally, George Lucas, I guess, until he sold it. But that's different than using a screenshot or actual clips from a movie. Do you know what I'm saying?
I suppose so.
I don't know how to solve. Honestly, I don't know how to solve it.
It's a really tricky one, because unlike actual physical like patents with technology, where there's like an actual object that functions a certain way involved, you're talking about stuff that just comes out of the imagination. There's the physical rendering, you write a thing or you draw a thing or you compose a thing. But ultimately, once that's out there, it can be replicated indefinitely, especially with the advent of the internet.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to it's impossible to stop. I do agree with that. It is impossible to stop. However, I mean, I like art, and I want there to be an incentive for someone to, and like a real monetary incentive. If someone invents Star Wars, which I liked the original stuff, if someone invents Star Wars, I want them to make billions of dollars, and I want no one else to be able to steal it from them. Like, that's what I want. Like, I want that universe. I want it to be that if you write Harry Potter, you get Harry Potter. I think there's, I think that's inspiring to people, and I think there's some justice inherent in that. Now, how much Star Wars? Like, how much do you get? Can you stop people from writing fan fiction? Can you, like, I don't know where that line is. Can you say, well, I invented the characters, therefore you can never write about the characters? I don't know. Maybe you can never make money off of the characters is usually the way it works, but they leave you alone if you just write fan fiction. I don't know. But again, the double-edged sword thing, I'll say, let's say that you sit down after this conversation and you write the next, I hate to say Harry Potter because I don't really like Harry Potter, but Harry Potter's popular. So you write the next Harry Potter. Okay. And I want you to be in control of that. I want you to have creative control of that, because it's yours. It's your creation. I want you to decide if you're going to sell the rights to a movie studio. I want you to decide who and how and under what terms. If you're going to let people make comic books out of it, I want you to decide. If there's going to be follow-on novels, if you want to write them, I want that to be you. If you want to let someone else do it, I want that to be in your control, because that's something that you created and you brought forth. If we open this up and you're successful, Disney will sweep in. They'll spend $1 billion out marketing you, and they will usurp your IP. And no one will know about you anymore. You will cease to lose. Yeah, there'll be some nerds who are like, Lord Coley wrote the original one. Blah 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 blah. No one will care. It will be marketed out the wazoo by Disney, and that'll be the end of it. And Disney's version will be all that remains.
I don't think that I'm trying to suggest that there wouldn't be some sort of legal recourse if somebody is outright copying you or trying to extend the universe officially. I think what I'm more trying to say is, well, one, there is an incentive to go after people for even small things because you're at risk of losing your copyright if you don't
if you don't pursue it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do think that's a problem. I disagree with that. Yeah. And you could get rid of that easily and say, look, and that's a standard contract clause for most contracts. Like a waiver of one individual thing does not constitute a continuing waiver, blah, blah, like that's a standard legal language. Like, yeah, just because I didn't go after you for stealing it doesn't mean that I can't later, or that you don't, that I'm like somehow releasing this into the public domain.
Yeah. I don't like that section of it, the incentive to go after those things. I mean, there was that semi-famous case where Disney went after somebody for putting Spider-Man on their child's headstone because they really liked that character. And theoretically, if they had not gone after them, they could have opened themselves up legally to losing their copyright. Supposedly. I haven't read the laws myself. Just putting
that was their argument anyway.
Yeah.
Right. And I am not a lawyer, so I don't know if that's true either, but I remember that argument. Yeah.
Right. I do think though that perhaps if the laws were altered somewhat so that people who are doing something entirely different, like maybe they're using completely original characters but using the same setting. So here we're using the world laws of this particular Marvel property, but these are all brand new characters. And we're not even, I'm not even saying that these people are getting money for creating this work, because even if you don't make money, people can come after you.
Yep.
I also don't believe that any of these kind of alternative works, even if you are using some of the original characters, I think the bigger problem is in trademark, because the trademark is what confuses people when a person sees two identical things and they can't tell what's the quote real thing. That's where you run into problems. I think you could still tackle this issue with trademark, but having the copyright being so, what's the word?
It's stringent and it's very strict.
Stringent. It's very good. Yeah. It just, I don't think it's very helpful. I think that there's actually a lot to say about fan works advertising for the original creator. Sure. You don't know how much money the original creator is going to lose by allowing these alternative works, but you also don't know how much money they're going to lose by not allowing them. How many people will get funneled into the original going, oh, this is based on something. Maybe I should go look at that original something since it inspired somebody.
I think you're hitting on something. I mean, you should definitely, I think loosening the requirement to protect your copyright is important. I think you could have different rules for like, like making money or not. I think you could have different rules for identifying yourself as like, well, this isn't the, like if you say this isn't the official, but I'm doing it, like, okay, well, that's something different. Like you've made that clear, so there's not trademark confusion. And I think you could probably have an argument where like what's actually creatively enough to copyright. Like, so when you say like, oh, we're not using any of the Marvel characters, but it's in the Marvel universe, I don't even know what that means. Like it's like, should that even be trademarkable? What, you have a universe in mind? Like, I don't know what that is. Like, so, I guess maybe the analogy I can think of is like, if I start writing something that was a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, and there's lightsabers and Jedi involved, but no character that you recognize, you might want to say, well, that's unique to Star Wars and blah 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 blah. But yeah,
we have an interesting example existent right now, which is playing video games for people online. Generally, that's considered a gray area right now in law. Yes, in law, technically, anybody who created the original video game can come after you for playing that game. They just generally don't, because it's great advertising. And a lot of the people who watch these video games either cannot afford those games, so you're not losing their money because they simply just don't have the funds to give you in the first place. B, people who don't even like video games, they just like the stories they hear from the video games, so they watch it more like a passive media rather than an interactive media, and that's how they take the thing in. I don't see original game developers specifically sitting down with their own game and playing it for people. Just in case you didn't want to buy the game, here's a playthrough for you. I don't see that being a thing, like a pay-per-view kind of situation necessarily. It's an interesting idea, maybe under the current laws, but it's not done. It's not something that the companies are doing. In fact, a lot of independent creators of video games are thrilled when a well-known YouTuber picks up their game and shows it to a bunch of people, because in my experience, lots of people will see a thing, monkey see, monkey do. They'll see the thing and go, wow, that looks fun. I want to engage with it in an interactive level because I've seen somebody else having fun with it. Now I want to play it too. It's a slightly different format than just music or drawings or a movie, because that is a passive media. But I do think that this example sets up a very tangible argument for changing how we look at IP in general, this kind of IP.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to make an argument that watching a video game prevents someone from buying it. That probably doesn't happen,
or even waylays them from buying it.
Right. So yeah, and it probably has the opposite effect.
Consumer friendly, because there's a lot of people who are on the fence about said game, X game, whatever. They're like, I've heard about this. It seems like it might be my kind of thing, but I've also heard some other stuff. They see somebody else play it and they go, oh yeah, that's for me. Or maybe they go, oh, that's not for me. You're actually saving yourself a little bit of pain. Technically, the original company would be losing the money because the person didn't purchase the thing to try it. But you also don't have a butthurt person saying this thing sucks, don't buy it, in a venomous tone. Right. Yeah, I mean, look, I think step one is to probably reduce, get rid of these requirements that you have to be enforcing your IP, you have to be going after, because I think that creates perverse incentives. And I think, look, I mean, like you said, a lot of game developers don't care. I think in the free market, you might not need to change much. Like if they don't have to go after, they probably by default, you might just get what you want. Like most game developers would be like, yeah, or the people would realize like, oh, this is in my best interest. I don't feel like I need to go pursue this. I don't feel like I need to go after these people at all. And like, this is helping me. I'm not gonna, if you're a game developer or, you're creative person, writing, even if you've granted your IP to a larger company, it's a waste of time and energy for them to be going after people who put Spider-Man on kids' graves. Like that costs them more in lawyers' time than they could possibly have made out of it, except for the legal, unless there's a legal perverse incentive that's been foisted upon them, in which case they're behaving that way because of the system, which can be fixed. Yeah. So going back a little bit to what you said, do you really think that it's clearly in the zone of theft if somebody creates a derivative work that would never in a million years be offered by the original work?
I don't know what it means to say would never be offered. Like I don't know. Like give me an example with Harry Potter where you're 100% certain that J.K. Rowling would never do it.
I mean, I guess speaking in absolutes in this way is kind of a moot point. You can't know that. You just cannot determine that. But I think Harry Potter, but all the characters are squids, would be very unlikely for the original work to come up with.
Right, but so let me throw this out there though. But here's why this is one of the things this is why I like intellectual property, or why I support it fundamentally. If I were her, even if I never planned to make Harry Potter porn, I wouldn't want people making Harry Potter porn. It would undermine the legitimacy and credibility of the
Harry
universe
Potter's
I was trying to create.
Probably a bad example for that one, considering all the underageness. But sorry,
fair. But you know what I mean. Like maybe I felt the same way about squids. Maybe I think squids are icky and yucky and horrible, and I never want anyone to make with squids. Like, well, okay, that's my thing. I don't want people making the characters with squids. Now, again, if we're in kind of a situation in which she doesn't gain anything for going after you, like she doesn't have to go after you in any particular way to protect any other interest, and you do a Harry Potter play with squids at your local theater, like, is she gonna come after you? Probably not. Should she be allowed to? Maybe, but like the damages would be pretty limited, I would think. Like you'd have to weigh like how much would that actually hurt her, right? And at some point there's just no damage. At some point you make an argument, like depending on what it is that you're doing, at some point she doesn't suffer any damage, right? Reputationally, financially, or anything. So
right. But the thought here though is would it be outright theft? Because I'm not sure if it would be outright theft. I know that there's a lot of creative works out there that borrow a concept, but it's in a completely new medium. I would say it's not outright theft, and I would say outright theft is a hard word to use with respect to intellectual property when you're doing something derivative. Derivative works are almost never outright theft, right? And the definitely
question that
borrowing.
Well, I mean, look, it is, and the question we have to answer is, which I don't think is straightforward philosophically, and I don't think it's obvious, is like, how much is enough? Like if I take your Harry Potter book and I change Harry's name to Ralph and publish it, that's a derivative work. And I have the series of Ralph Potter, and it's like, well, it's derivative, but very slightly, it's mostly outright theft, right? Whereas if I write a completely different story about a magician and his name happens to be Harry, it's basically not derivative at all, and you'd have to make it be a really hard case to say that I got it from Harry Potter. So, and there's gradations there, and I don't think it's super clear. And I think these are hard questions to struggle with, and I think because of my bias here, I think the free market could handle them pretty well.
It's one of those unfortunate things where I do believe it is very case-by-case basis, something that law is not really well suited to as it stands, because once something goes through a court case, it's considered precedent. It can be referenced. It can be like, this is the hard line. See, they did it here. And you've got lawyers bickering about which way to go based on that precedent. And precedent, really great. Once a thing's been proven out a certain way, it supposedly makes things easier going forward. But I don't think that it's helpful in the area of creative IP.
No, I think it's real. I think you're right. I think it's very difficult because there's just so many there's so many different iterations and different permutations of what can be done. but it's really, really difficult to look at precedent and gain anything out of it, really. And and I think part of it is, if we're in let's just imagine a world in which people cared about the artists getting their due, but they weren't forced to do anything. I mean, you might imagine a world in which people are like, yeah, you know what, Lord Coley just stole that from J.K. Rowling. I'm gonna boycott her, like, just voluntarily. I'm not gonna pay her anything. Like, that's a clear ripoff, right? And she doesn't
already live in
deserve
that
to
world.
get that.
50 Shades of Grey exists.
I never read it, thankfully. But sure. But yeah, I mean, I think
I've just seen videos going over the comparisons of the movie and the book, like lots of videos. It was a huge topic for a bit there.
Wait, what was it supposedly a ripoff of?
Twilight?
Oh, see, I didn't watch or read Twilight either, so it's like
my personal theory is that Twilight is derivative of the Vampire Diaries.
Oh yeah, probably.
Everybody
I think we had
has
this conversation
their
on
theories. Yeah,
Alex's
we did.
show. Yeah. Cheeky Mare asks, are deep fakes going to be copyright infringement or ID theft in the future? Why not both?
It's definitely using a person's famous likeness or likeness at all. And that's a whole issue, using somebody's likeness without permission. It's generally passed on in parody and satire, but even then, people in parody and satire get in trouble.
Yeah,
South
and we're
Park
seeing
gets in trouble.
Yeah, and we're seeing that culturally. We're kind of unable to tell when things are parodies. I mean, you're getting fact checks for Babylon Bee articles, so clearly there's a large segment of society that's not sure what's a parody, or what's satire. So yeah, I don't know. That's a good. G-Man says it will be impossible to stop deep fakes. You stamp one down and 10 more will pop up. Yeah, I think deep fakes are, like, technologically, that's a super interesting topic about where we'll be. I think ultimately it's just going to be massive skepticism is what's going to, like, people are just not going to believe anything.
That's what I'm hoping for. I honestly think that if we get to that point and it becomes a widely known thing, that people will finally start going, is this real?
Right. I just don't believe it. Yeah. I think they might. So yeah, I don't know. All right, well, anything else, or should we wrap it up? I don't think we solved anything, by the way.
No, I don't think we did either. I just think it's an incredibly interesting, worthwhile topic.
Yeah, no, it is. I agree. And yeah, I just don't know how to solve it. So
neither of us are lawyers or lawmakers or politicians. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, and I the reason I think it's interesting is it's not like philosophically, it's kind of like abortion to me, in that there's philosophically some clear lines at either end of it, and then there's a huge gray area where I'm like, I don't know, that's really tough. I don't think it's obvious. So yeah, it's one of those things that would be nice to have to hash out and figure out as a society. So
I think that a lot of things need to be a bit more kind and permissive towards each other, but not like step all over the original creator kind of way, just in a way that allows things to exist, to be built upon, to be altered, to be played with.
I think most creators, in my experience, that I've met are that way. It's typically it's the large, and I hate to be like, I'm not anti-large corporation fundamentally, but like it tends to be the large corporations who acquire the IP rights that are much more ruthless about enforcing them than it is about.
Well, they pay so much money for the license and rights and stuff like that in the first place. So of course they're going to be protective when they spent that much money. They've assigned a value to it that they very much have incentive to defend.
Right. And if there are legal reasons why they need to defend stuff, like you were saying, then that makes sense. But Maybe we should get an IP lawyer on here sometime and have a conversation.
That would be fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, cool. Thank you, Lord Coley. That was
Thank
a cool
you.
conversation. Yeah. Let's see. It is. It's almost time to end, but I see one question from Greg the Baritone, who's always in here, and I don't want to ignore Greg. Plus, he says funny stuff, so he should get some love. He says, Carter, if you start your own company, how can you maneuver diversity without falling into DEI? Well, first of all, you don't have to worry about it until you're a certain size. Like Cheeky Mare was hitting 150 or whatever. They're like, when you're small, there's no requirement. I think managing diversity to me is not a thing. Like it's managing the government that matters. It's managing, the getting in trouble. If I was going to try and grow a large company and get up to a number where that mattered, where we'd get in trouble, it would not be about making sure that my workforce had some particular ethnic mix. It would be about making sure we don't get in trouble and that we're hiring the best people. The end. So I think the vector to be careful of is obviously the HR department, as Cheeky mentioned. You as hard as it is, you find the Ron Swanson, like Cheeky's company, right? Like find an HR person who is more understanding of that culturally, and you gotta guard the HR department ruthlessly. Like that's where the necrosis starts, and then I would, again, kind of similar to my advice to Cheeky would be when you get that big and you have to start doing with it, because when you reach a certain size, there are rules. I probably would just make the colorblind argument and document the process and make sure that we were reviewing it and doing everything that we possibly could to demonstrate that we are not taking race into account. And if someone wanted to take me to court for not taking race into account, I think that would be a fascinating battle. So that's a battle I would happily fight publicly. The "you're not being racist" battle. I think you might prevail. So someone says, Greg again says, I've seen diversity and inclusion departments at large companies leave out equity. Have any companies actually implemented merit, fairness, and equity? I don't know if anyone's implemented merit, fairness, and I think you mean equality. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we need, honestly, I hate HR departments generally. I don't think we need all of this crap. We don't need acronyms and like cute slogans about like fairness and equality and blah, 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 blah. You're making widgets, make widgets, hire the best people, be transparent, treat people well, be done. You don't need to have like, you don't need to do all this gobbledygook virtue signaling about like how you do this and that. Like just, make your widgets, say we hire the best people, we pay them enough to keep them around, and we're merit based. I mean, if you want to read I know we're all supposed to hate Netflix, but I really do like No Rules Rules, which is Reid Hoffman's management book. He talks about Netflix management philosophy. I actually really like the book and in his philosophy there, and I don't think he talks about equity and that stuff, and maybe the book predates when that became hip to talk about. But yeah, it's basically like, look, it's very individualist. It's like the whole philosophy is individual responsibility, and it's like, yeah, that's the philosophy that I would adopt, and say, come in, we're going to hire the best people, we're going to give them enough rope to hang themselves or climb a mountain, and we'll see which one they do. And like that's kind of the philosophy there, to paraphrase. All right. Wait till people start suing each other in the metaverse. Someone in chat as well. Yeah, I don't know. What do you get? You get tokens if you win? I don't know. There will be lawsuits in the metaverse. All right. Okay. I think we're done. thanks everyone for sticking around. Thank you especially to Cheeky Mare and to Lord Coley who came on to chat. That was a lot of fun. I love doing those. We're going to try and do these, as often as we can. Maybe we should have given you guys a little bit more heads up lead time, so we'll try and give you more lead time for the next one. But again, thank you very much. Thanks for the questions, conversations, all that kind of stuff. Thank you to those of you who support us at unsafespace.com. Means a lot. Speaking of companies, we're like kind of a company, but not really a company, because basically I heard that companies you're not supposed to have to write a check personally to companies every month to keep them going. That's the rumor. So I'm continuing to do that. So it'd be nice to not have to do that. So, hey, to the extent that you can help us out, please do that. In addition to this show, Dangerous Thoughts, anything you do to help us out does support our other series. Rebel Civics, I think, was that's how almost every Wednesday as well. And I think today's episode earlier was Keith released an abridged version of the Declaration of Independence. On Tuesdays, we have 451 Degrees with Alex Maselli, which is a show about big tech and censorship. On Mondays, I co-host a show called Narrative Dissonance with Juliet Dillon, where we talk about how the mainstream media is lying to you. And tomorrow, every Thursday, Token Minority Report happens with Beverly and Alex as your host. And tomorrow, after Token Minority Report, you heard Lord Coley mention streaming games. That's because she knows what's going on. Tomorrow, after Token Minority Report, we are going to try and do in our Discord server. So if you're not in Discord, well, oh well. But in our Discord server tomorrow, we're going to try and stream, what is it called? Left 4 Dead 2? I think that's the name of it, right, Beverly? Yeah. We're gonna play Left 4 Dead 2. I'm going to try and be there. My schedule's a little wonky because I've got an infant baby, so sometimes I gotta, stop killing zombies or my co-players and go take care of the baby. Usually the NPC does better, so when I leave the game, the party usually succeeds a little bit better. So I'll try and leave the game as often as possible if we're having a tough time. But anyway, we're going to try to do that tomorrow night. So if you want to join that on the Discord server, you can. And our next book club is this book, Fossil Future, by Alex Epstein, and that's August 14th. So if you want to read that, you want to join book club, get on it, start reading the book. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great evening, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, just wanted to add to that. Another thing
yes,
is
name here.
Bad Movie Club. So that I think
when is Bad Movie Club?
Going to be the same day as book club, but that night at 9 p.m. Eastern.
Oh, okay. So a good book, bad movie. That's the 14th. All right.
I forget what it is. It's Double Dragon, I think. I don't know. I'm just going in order of what people suggest. So.
Oh, okay. All right. And the last one was Roadie. Okay. So, which I didn't see. All right. You heard it from Beverly. Have a good night, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for sticking around until the end. If you're new to Unsafe Space, check out our deep content library that includes discussions with everyone from James Lindsay to Brett Weinstein. And please consider helping to fund our work by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on a variety of social media platforms, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space Discord server, which is open to financial supporters at any level. We hope to see you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production is known by the state of California to cause unregulated ideation that may be harmful to bureaucrats. Association with the following individuals or tacos is strictly prohibited. Apropos of nothing, I was just wondering, how would you feel about another pandemic? Your president is in full control of his mental faculties. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks of the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.